So U of L lost. Okay. So we have a ton of shots that happened in here in Louisville, right, between 97 to 2005. We're trying to figure out what it is, what's going on here, okay? What are we looking at? Why is this happening? And I think if you just look at some of the history of Kentucky, I mean, just start from the very beginning. 1774 is when Harrod's Fort was here. Hernando de Soto was the first white man that came through here, like 1500s, but the first settlement was during Daniel Boone's time, and it was Harrod's Fort, which was 1774. So that's 240 years ago, like exactly 240 years. So 240 years is how long the Kentucky white civilization has been here, for 240 years. And if you think about 240 years, that's not a long time. 240 years would be like three grandmothers, you know, back to back to back. So it's long generations. But 240 years, they wouldn't even have to be 100 years old. They would just have to be 80 years old, right? Just 80. So 80-year-old, 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 right? So you have, you know, we only been here 240 years, and I was thinking about the different empires. The Portuguese Empire lasted for about 600 years. The Ottoman Empire, 600 years. Ethiopian, 800. Holy Roman Empire lasted 900 years. Roman Empire lasted 1,500 years, and the Kush Empire lasted 1,300 years. So when you compare the amount of years that Kentucky's been in existence to some of these other empires, like the Roman Empire lasted, you know, a really long ass time. We're babies. 240 years. We just got here. We've only been here for like a short amount of time. And then and when they got here, 1774, there's an Indian genocide, right? There was a Skippakithiki in 1754, which was a village that was well known in Kentucky. People want to say that Kentucky, you know, there's no Indians here. That's bullshit. The Shawnee actually came from Kentucky. This is the homeland of the Shawnee. There's also Chickasaw and Cherokee and Muskogee Creek and Delaware and Yuchi. So there's a whole bunch of Indian tribes over here, and there's Indian culture throughout the entire state. So there's arrowheads and earthworks and lots of different pottery and shit like that. So there's like lots of archaeological sites all throughout Kentucky. And you know, as soon as white people got here, they was killing Indians. They were killing the Shawnee. And one of the biggest wars, one of the biggest things for Kentuckians, like for the foundation of Kentucky, was the War of 1812. And the War of 1812 was a war against the Shawnee. The War of 1812 was when they murdered Tecumseh. And Tecumseh could have been born in Kentucky. We know Puck Shinwa, well, his daddy was born in Kentucky. And we also know that he had got shot in West Virginia at Point Pleasant. So we know, you know, what happened with Puck Shinwa, but we don't know what happened in the beginning years of Tecumseh. In this one book I have of the attack on Martin Station, that said that Tecumseh was in one of the raids into Kentucky. So the I guess there's fireworks going off because UK won. That's funny. So yeah, and actually there is a huge support of UK here in Louisville. In fact, I hear more about UK than Louisville in Louisville, which is not a good. I don't know. That maybe that's good for the UK franchise, I guess. I'd say a lot of the West End love UK. Okay, so let's see. Kentucky is a Shawnee homeland. It's named after either the Iroquois, the place of meadows, or the Shawnee, a dark and bloody river, dark and bloody land. So the name itself is Shawnee. The War of 1812 is one of the most important wars for the establishment of Kentucky, because 30 of the 120 counties is named after War of 1812 heroes, or people that had died at the War of 1812. And Kentucky, 64% of those who died in the War of 1812 were Kentuckians. So Kentuckians were very much the soldiers who were fighting in this war, and it wasn't a second war of independence, as some historians like to say. It's the third white man's civil war over Amerindian land. This is Tecumseh's war. Okay, this is Tecumseh's last stand. It shouldn't be called the War of 1812. It should be called Tecumseh's last stand, because Tecumseh's fighting the British and the Americans for the territory, for some territory, right? They was in Shawnee, and they kept on, they was in Kentucky, and then they got this treaty and that treaty, and they kept on getting pushed and pushed, and then finally they just wiped them out, right? They murdered Tecumseh. The man who murdered Tecumseh was a Kentuckian. So a Kentuckian, Kentuckians came in, they were genociding Shawnee, they were killing Shawnee people, they killed Tecumseh, so they killed the king of the Shawnees. And 30 of the 120 counties were named after those who had died in the War of 1812. So not only was Kentucky founded by Indian genociders, Indian murderers, savage, barbaric murderers, but then they named the counties after the barbaric murderers, so that way every person that would ever set foot on that land would, not make the mistake that it used to be Indian land. So, like, Jefferson County is named after Thomas Jefferson, a white man. You got Clark County, which is where Estes, the last Shawnee town, was, and Clark was a white man, named after William Rogers Clark. And so they put on their name on the land, and then forever, you go to Clark County. You don't go to Estes. You don't go to Shawnee River. You go to the Cumberland River, right? The Cumberland River used to be the Shawanese River, and so so that's some of the origins. So why do we have what we see today? We have racism. We have targeted lynching. We've seen lynchings happen in our own, in recent history here in Kentucky. There's a whole book actually just about all the lynchings that had happened in Kentucky. So, but lynching of black folks or any people of color has happened from day one, 1774. Since white people have got into Kentucky, there's been the killing of other people of color. So the Indian genocide that starts in 1774 extends to 1812, right? We're killing Indians, killing Tecumseh, renaming our counties after the white heroes who had died when they were fighting the Indians. They had slaves at the time. They tried to, a Presbyterian minister tried to make slavery illegal in Kentucky, but was unable to do it, so slavery is allowed during this time. And just in general, actually, just with racism, I mean, there's only been 5 or 6 black senators in the U.S. Senate, and there's only like 6 black billionaires in the world. During Reconstruction, black folks made up the majority of South Carolina, so they did have like one state where they almost had, they almost had control of their government, and for a small span of time they did, before the Mississippi Plan and before Reconstruction had failed because of Rutherford B. Hayes. In 1877, he pulled the federal troops out from the South. So Kentucky racism, so really that's why this has happened. There's racism, there's institutional racism, there's housing, there's segregation when it comes to housing. And the Gallatin County, the county I'm from, is a northern Kentucky county, so northern you would think it would be more tolerant, and it's not. It's 97% white, so it's lily white. A lot of Appalachia counties is about that, lily white. Even Louisville, the chocolate city of Kentucky, has got 22% black population, so 1 out of 5 compared to like Cincinnati's 50%. So there's even, the place where there'd be the biggest black population, there isn't that many black folks. So actually throughout all of Kentucky, there's not many black people in Kentucky. The ones that are still here do show a resilience and, maybe close in family ties, good tradition. So that's, they're resilient, tenacious. You have, in 1855 was the Know Nothing riots. So the Know Nothing riots actually shows how racist the white people are. So I think we got to, there's definitely a connection of Confederates or white supremacy that continues to evade the culture of Kentucky. In 1855, the Know Nothing riots were the riots against the Irish and the Germans. And the Irish and the Germans were coming into Louisville and trying to establish themselves. A lot of the Germans had built a lot of the churches, the Catholic churches that were constructed around here. But the ones who had founded Kentucky were similar to the ones who had founded, some of the other 13 colonies, in that they were English, they were Anglo-Saxon, and they were Protestants. So they were anti-Catholics, and they were a specific type of white person. They were English Anglo-Saxons. And so the English-speaking Anglo-Saxons looked at the German-speaking or the Irish-speaking immigrants as people distinctly different than themselves. So it was like, damn them Germans, damn them Irish, they need to get the hell out of here. Those German-speaking people, they have a different dialect, they got a different tongue, they are Catholics, so they have different religion, they have a different culture, and also they were also drinkers. The Puritans weren't drinkers, and so the Irish and the Germans would bring alcohol. So that was another big thing. That was the Protestants. That would be the white Anglo-Protestants, hating people who you would consider today to be white, but back then they were so, pure. They wanted to keep their race so pure that they hated the Irish, they hated the Germans, and then that's why you had Prohibition that had happened. So Prohibition was the Protestants trying to make this new, this alcoholic craze or whatever with the Germans and the Irish, try to cut them off, at the legs. And that's 19, I want to say 1920s, but you have the 1855 Know Nothing riots, which shows how, white people were against Germans and Irish, and that also preceded the Civil War by a few years, by 6 years. So the Civil War basically, that's Kentucky. What Kentucky is, I don't know. People are very confused about the Civil War, so I feel as though the Kentucky was centrally located, so they're strategically important. Lincoln said that he hoped to have God on his side, but he had to have Kentucky. So he thought Kentucky was the whole game. He thought, he didn't give a shit if God was on the side, but he wanted, so it just showed you Kentucky was more important to him than God. He was also born here, so I don't know if it was some sort of home state pride either. So the Civil War is really important too, because so far up until 1774, up until 1860s, we've had Indian genociders, we've had plantation owners. Well, what's going to happen to slave state Kentucky, who sides with the North? Well, Kentucky sides with the North. They side with Lincoln. They are winners. They pick the right side. Their governor, Magafin, he's run out of town. Magafin wasn't going to fight the Confederates, but he also didn't want to fight the Union, so he wanted to be neutral. But he was more Confederate. Eventually, he got ran out of town, and then the Confederates tried to establish something in Bowling Green, and then that fell through. I think the leader of that outfit got shot, and then it was over. They didn't have control of the Capitol building. They didn't have control of Frankfort. It was Lincoln. Kentucky was firmly Lincoln's. And so since Kentucky was firmly Lincoln's and the Confederates had been expelled, you would think that being on the right side of history, being on the winning side, that we would have, took some pride in it. In fact, I take plenty of pride into it. 100,000 Kentuckians fought for the North. So more Kentuckians fought for the North. 25,000 fought for the South. Out of the 100,000 that fought for the North, 25,000 were African American ex-slaves who had picked up, the gun and wanted to fight for their own freedom, which is, even better, which is awesome. So there was actually 25,000 liberated, newly freed men. And so, Kentucky fought, supplied more people for the North, fought for the North, politically was sided with Lincoln, politically was, for the Union, for America, for the president, and yet Kentucky is known to have seceded after the Civil War. So we picked the winning side, but once we win, then we start electing all these Confederates, and they stay in power for a real long-ass time. 1900, William Justice Goebel is assassinated by a Confederate, and he had got into an altercation with the Confederates, so at Stanford, and he was a bank owner, he was a corrupt piece of shit, and they got into some weird argument, and he wound up shooting them, and then he gets shot by them. But he was taking on that established Confederate white supremacist, strand of thought that had been in Kentucky the whole time, and so he was a breath of fresh air. So this strand of white supremacy goes throughout Kentucky history.